I had never been to a Velmart before that night. I don't even think I'd ever noticed one until then. Maybe they weren't common in my area, or maybe I just never paid attention. But that night, there it was, a bright, massive, open 24/7, like it had been waiting for me. I only stopped because I needed some things. It was late, probably close to 11:30 p.m., and I wasn't in the mood for a full grocery run. Just a few basics: bread, eggs, maybe a frozen meal or two. The parking lot was about half full, which I thought was weird for that time of night. But the store looked normal enough. I parked near the entrance, grabbed a cart, and walked inside. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not empty. Just quiet. Usually, even in 24-hour stores, you hear some kind of background noise, music over the speakers, employees chatting, carts rattling. But Velmart was nearly silent. The only sound was the hum of the overhead lights and the occasional beep from the registers. There were other shoppers, but they weren't talking. Not to each other, not to employees, not even on their phones. Just walking, grabbing items, moving with a kind of deliberate slowness. I shook it off and started down the aisles, telling myself I was overthinking it. But as I moved through the store, I started to notice little things that didn't sit right. First, the layout. It felt off. I've been to enough big box stores to know the general setup: produce near the entrance, frozen foods in the back, registers at the front. But Velmart's aisles felt wrong. Some were too long, stretching farther than they should have, while others seemed too short, like they had been cut off. And the signage was inconsistent. The aisle numbers didn't go in order. I passed aisle 7, then aisle 12, then aisle 6. I figured maybe it was a mistake, but every sign looked professionally printed, like it had always been that way. Then I realized something that made my stomach tighten. There were no employees. None stocking shelves, none walking the floor. Just the people at the registers scanning groceries without speaking. I kept moving, grabbing a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, a frozen meal. I told myself I was being weird, that it was just another late-night grocery store with a strange vibe. But then something happened that I couldn't explain. I was in the frozen food aisle, reaching for a bag of vegetables, when I felt someone standing behind me. Close. Too close. I turned around fast. A man was standing there, just a foot away. Middle-aged, thin, wearing a collared shirt. He wasn't looking at me, just past me at the freezer doors. His expression was completely blank. I took a step back. Sorry," I muttered, assuming I was in his way. He didn't react. Didn't move. Just stood there. His hands were empty, no cart, no basket. I waited a few seconds, then gave up and walked to another aisle. I glanced back once, and he was still there, standing in the same spot, staring at the freezer doors like he was waiting for something. At this point, I decided I had seen enough. I didn't care if I forgot something, I just wanted to check out and leave. But when I got to the front of the store, I hesitated. Because something else was wrong. I looked at the registers. Each one had a line. People standing perfectly still, not moving, not talking. Just waiting. It wasn't that they were taking a long time. It was that none of them were checking out. I picked a line and stood there, hoping it would move. It didn't. The cashier wasn't scanning anything. He was just staring ahead, expression blank. I looked over at another register. Same thing. I glanced at the other customers. None of them reacted. They just stood there. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Too long. Then, without warning, the cashier at my register looked up. Right at me. He hadn't moved in minutes, hadn't reacted to anyone else, but now his head snapped toward me like he had just noticed I was there. And he smiled. Not a friendly smile. A forced one. Like someone told him to smile, but he didn't understand why. I stepped back. My heart was pounding. I turned to leave. Screw the groceries, I didn't need them that badly. Then I heard it. A voice crackling over the loudspeakers. Flat. Emotionless. Velmart is now closing. Please proceed to the nearest exit. I froze. I looked at the time on my phone. It was 11:47 p.m. The store was 24 hours. I turned toward the doors. Customers were already leaving. Not in a rush. Not like normal people reacting to a sudden store closing. Just walking calmly in perfect silence. I followed them. Fast. I walked through the automatic doors and into the parking lot, my breath unsteady. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The cars in the lot? They were all running. Every single one. Engines on, headlights glowing in the dark. But there were no drivers inside. No one getting in. Just idling. Like they were waiting. I didn't think. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, throwing myself into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking as I turned the ignition. I pulled out fast, my tires screeching against the pavement. In my rearview mirror, I saw the Velmart sign glowing against the night. And in front of the store, lined up neatly in rows, were the customers. Standing. Still. Watching me leave. I didn't go home right away. I drove for almost an hour, down roads I didn't recognize, until the shaking in my hands stopped. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had convinced myself I had imagined it. That it was just some weird corporate test store with an automated system, or some kind of bizarre training night. But the next morning, when I checked my phone, I saw the picture I had taken inside Velmart. First, it looked normal. Just a frozen food aisle. Then I noticed something in the reflection of the freezer doors. A man. Standing behind me. Too close. Staring. I hadn't seen him when I took the picture. And worse, he wasn't in any of the other aisles. I barely slept that night. I kept thinking about that picture, the one on my phone. The reflection in the freezer doors. The man standing behind me. I hadn't seen him when I took the photo. He wasn't one of the shoppers I remembered. He wasn't in the aisle at all. And yet, there he was, standing way too close to me. The more I stared at the photo, the worse it got. His face wasn't clear. The reflection was warped like a smudge on glass. No features. No eyes. But the longer I looked, the more I got the feeling that if I stared too long, he'd turn around. I locked my phone and tossed it across the room. I needed to know if Velmart was still there. I left my apartment around 9 a.m. telling myself I was just running errands. That I wasn't actually driving to Jackson Street. But I was. I had to see it in the daylight to prove to myself that it had been real. But when I got there, Velmart was gone. The entire building was missing. Not closed. Not abandoned. Gone. Just an empty lot overgrown with weeds and cracked asphalt. Like there had never been a store there at all. I pulled over, my hands tight on the steering wheel, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I knew what I had seen. I knew I had been inside that store less than 10 hours ago. But the lot in front of me looked like it had been empty for years. And then I saw the sign. Not the Velmart sign. A different one. Rusted, tilted, barely standing. Future site of Blackwell Plaza Shopping Center, opening 2022. A construction sign. Faded. 2 years out of date. The parking lot had cracks thick with weeds. The sidewalk was chipped and worn. The whole place looked like it had been abandoned long before last night. I got out of the car, my legs shaky. Walked onto the pavement where the entrance should have been. Nothing. No sign of the building. But I did see something. Scattered across the ground, half hidden in the dirt, were tire marks. Fresh. And footprints. They led toward the center of the lot. And then they just stopped. No turning back. No change in direction. Just an abrupt end. Like whoever made them had simply vanished. I wasn't sure what to do. I checked my phone, thinking maybe I could find something, news about the store, a listing, anything. But when I searched for Velmart Jackson Street, nothing came up. No address. No business listing. No proof that it had ever existed. I tried to look up Velmart as a chain. The results were weirdly vague. A few locations in other states. Nothing recent. No ads, no promotions, no grand openings. Just scattered mentions of the name like the stores had been phased out years ago. And then, buried deep in an old forum post from 2014, I found a comment. Anyone else ever been to a Velmart? I swear I went to one in Ohio, but when I went back, it was just gone. Like it was never there. Weirdest part? My receipt didn't have an address, just a date and time. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my wallet and pulled out my receipt from last night. No store address. No phone number. Just the date and time. February 24, 11:47 p.m. And at the bottom, instead of a total, it just said, "Thank you for shopping with US. See you again soon." I was done. I had seen enough. I crumpled up the receipt, threw it on the passenger seat, and drove away. I told myself I wasn't going to think about it anymore. That I wasn't going to check my phone for that picture again. That I was going to let it go. And I did. For a while. Until last night. I was lying in bed, finally starting to forget about the whole thing, when my phone buzzed. A text message. No name. Just a number I didn't recognize. The message was short. Too short. "You forgot something." I sat up fast, my chest tight. Another buzz. A second message. "Check your fridge." I didn't want to. I sat there, breathing hard, my brain screaming at me to ignore it, to turn my phone off and forget I ever saw it. But my feet were already moving. I walked to the kitchen, every step feeling heavier. Opened the fridge. And there, sitting on the middle shelf, a single plastic bag. With the Velmart logo. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking as I reached for it. It was cold. Too cold. like it had been sitting there for days. I opened it slowly. Inside was a carton of eggs. The same one I had picked up last night. Except, the expiration date was wrong. It didn't say February. It didn't even say 2024. It said February 24th, 1997. I dropped the bag and stumbled back. The text messages gone. The number? No longer in my call history. Like it had never been there at all. I don't know what's happening. I don't know how Velmart appeared. Or how it disappeared. But I know this. Something followed me home. And if I ever see another Velmart, I'm not going inside. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, every light in the apartment on, staring at my fridge like it might move if I looked away. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That whatever had happened in Velmart wasn't over. The plastic bag was still on the floor where I dropped it. The carton of eggs, the one dated February 24th, 1997, was inside. I hadn't touched it. And the text messages? They were gone. Completely erased. No record of them, no number to trace. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. I had to do something. At 8 a.m. I drove back to Jackson Street. The empty lot was still there. Weeds, cracked asphalt, the faded construction sign. I parked across the street and sat there for a long time, waiting for, I don't know what. For someone to show up? For Velmart to reappear? Nothing happened. I got out and walked the lot, searching for anything: security cameras, old wires, proof that the store had been real. But the only thing left was the tire marks. And the footprints. The ones that just stopped. I felt sick. I wasn't imagining this. It wasn't just in my head. So why was I the only one who seemed to remember Velmart? I decided to ask around. The first place I went was a gas station a few blocks down. The clerk looked half asleep, a bored guy in his early 20s, barely paying attention as I walked up. Hey, I said. Weird question. Do you remember a store called Velmart? He blinked at me. What? Velmart, I repeated. It was right down the road. Big place. Was open 2 nights ago. He frowned like I had just asked him if he remembered a grocery store on the moon. There's nothing down there, he said. Hasn't been for a while. How long? He scratched his head. Dunno. Years, probably. They were supposed to build some shopping center, but it never happened. I stared at him. You're sure? Yeah, dude. He gave me a weird look. You okay? I didn't answer. I just left. I tried asking someone else, a woman working the counter at a diner down the road. Same reaction. She had never heard of Velmart. No one had. I drove home with a pit in my stomach. I needed to prove to myself that I hadn't lost it. That Velmart had been real. That I had been inside. I grabbed my phone, scrolled back to the picture I took that night. The frozen food aisle. The man standing behind me in the reflection. At least, that's what I expected to see. But when I opened the photo, he was gone. The aisle was still there. The freezer doors, the lights, all of it looked the same. But the man? The shadow behind me? Gone. Like he had never been there in the first place. I checked my call log. The text history. The receipt in my pocket. Nothing. It was like Velmart had erased itself. Or worse. Like it had never needed to exist in the first place. That night, I locked every door in my apartment. Closed the blinds. Left the TV on for background noise because the silence felt too heavy. I forced myself into bed around 1 a.m. telling myself I was done with this. That I'd let it go. But at 2:47 a.m. I woke up. Because my phone was buzzing. A call. No caller ID. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering. I wasn't going to answer. But then, as the phone buzzed in my hand, a notification popped up. A new picture. From the unknown number. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I opened it. And I felt my entire body go cold. It was a photo. A Velmart parking lot. Full of cars. But this time I saw something else. In the very front of the lot where the entrance should have been, stood a single person. Not moving. Just standing there. And the worst part? I knew exactly who it was. Because the person in the photo was me. Standing alone in front of Velmart. 2 nights ago. I dropped my phone like it had burned me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. How? How could someone have taken this? I had been alone. Hadn't I? I picked the phone back up, my fingers shaking. The number was still there, an unknown caller. The call was still going. I swallowed hard. Slowly, I pressed the phone to my ear. For a second, there was nothing. Then, from the other end, in a voice that sounded like mine but wasn't quite right, I heard. You left too early. I hung up, turned off my phone, and sat in my bed, staring at the door, absolutely knowing. That somewhere, out there, Velmart was still waiting. And next time? I might not be able to leave. I didn't sleep after that call. I sat there in my bed, every nerve in my body screaming at me that I was not safe. That if I closed my eyes, if I let my guard down for even a second, I wouldn't wake up in the same place. That photo of me standing in front of Velmart was still on my phone. The timestamp said it was taken 2 nights ago. The exact time I had been there. But no one had been behind me. I had checked. I had looked. So who took it? And why did they say you left too early? I needed answers. And I knew exactly where to start. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I was going to find out if Velmart had existed before. If anyone else had ever seen it. If anyone else had disappeared. I started with public records. City business licenses, building permits, retail zoning applications. If Velmart had ever legally existed, there would be some record of it. There wasn't. Not a single business license under the name Velmart. Not for the address on Jackson Street. Not for anywhere in the entire state. It had never been registered. Never been approved. Never legally operated. I kept searching. Digging through old newspapers, missing persons reports, forum posts, anything that might mention a store appearing and disappearing. That's when I found it. A Reddit thread. Posted 8 years ago. The title made my stomach drop. Has anyone been to a Velmart? Did you leave? The original post was short. Just a few sentences. I went into a Velmart in St. Louis last night. I'd never seen it before. The store was full, but nobody spoke. The aisles felt wrong. When I tried to check out, nobody was moving. I left. When I drove by the next morning, the store was gone. Now my phone keeps getting calls from a blocked number. I answered once. My voice said, "Come back." Has this happened to anyone else? There were no replies. The account had been deleted. But the post had one upvote. Like someone else had seen it. Like someone else had been there too. I dug deeper. More posts. More vague stories scattered across the internet. Different states, different years, but the same pattern. A Velmart appearing where it shouldn't be. Shoppers that didn't act right. Stores that vanished overnight. And the ones who left? They got calls. Photos of themselves they hadn't taken. And eventually, they disappeared. I had to find someone who had survived it. I spent the rest of the day messaging anyone I could find who had mentioned Velmart online. Half the posts were years old and I had no way of knowing if the people were still around to answer. But then, one of them replied. It was an anonymous email. No name. No location. Subject, don't ask questions. Message, you need to stop. Stop looking. Stop talking about it. Stop thinking about it. Velmart doesn't like when people remember. It's not a store. It's something else. It doesn't exist until it needs to. And when it's done with you, it erases itself. If you left, you're lucky. But you're not safe. Because once you go inside, you're part of it. And when it comes back, it'll be for you. I slammed my laptop shut. My hands were shaking. I needed air. I needed to get out of my apartment. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. And that's when I saw my car. The trunk was open. I never leave my trunk open. My heart pounded as I walked toward it, my feet heavy like I was walking towards something I didn't want to see. Inside the trunk, there was a single plastic bag. A Velmart bag. Filled with groceries. The same ones I had left behind in the store that night. The eggs. The bread. The frozen meal. And sitting on top? A receipt. I picked it up, my fingers numb. It was dated 2 days from now. February 27th. I took a step back. And that's when I heard it. A voice right behind me. You should have stayed. I spun around, fists clenched. But there was no one there. Just the wind. Just the empty parking lot. Just my car, trunk still open, filled with groceries from a store that doesn't exist. My breath came in ragged gasps as I grabbed the bag, ran inside, and locked the door behind me. I dumped everything onto my kitchen counter. And that's when I saw what was at the bottom of the bag. Something that hadn't been there when I grabbed these same items in Velmart. A Velmart name tag. With my name on it. And underneath, in red marker, written by hand. See you at work. I didn't touch the name tag. I left it sitting on the counter, the cheap plastic reflecting the overhead light, mocking me. See you at work. I backed away, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't random. Velmart had put this here. It wanted me to come back. I spent the next few hours pacing my apartment, trying to convince myself I still had control. That I could ignore this. That if I just did nothing, it would all go away. But when my phone buzzed at exactly 11:47 p.m., I knew I was wrong. I didn't want to answer. But I couldn't ignore it. I picked it up, expecting another unknown number. But the screen showed a name. Darren Keller. I froze. I knew that name. I had seen it in a missing persons report. One of the people who had posted about Velmart online 8 years ago. And he had never been heard from again. My thumb hovered over the screen. The ringing kept going. Too long. I answered. At first, there was nothing. Then, shuffling. A breath. And then a voice. Low. Cracked. You have to go back. I swallowed hard. Who is this? The voice wheezed. It won't let you leave for good. I gripped the phone tighter. Where are you? Silence. Then just above a whisper. Inside. And the call cut off. I don't know why I got in my car. I wasn't thinking anymore. I just knew that if I didn't go now, Velmart would come for me anyway. I wasn't going to be another missing name on an old forum post. If Velmart wanted me back, I was walking in on my own terms. I drove to Jackson Street expecting the same empty lot. But as I turned the corner, the store was back. The lights were on. The parking lot was full. The same Velmart sign glowed like it had never been gone. I pulled in and parked, my hands numb. I sat there, staring at the automatic doors. Shoppers were walking in and out. Like normal. Like this was just any other store. But I knew better now. I knew what this place was. And I was about to walk into it. For the last time. The second I stepped inside, I knew something was different. The silence was worse. Before it, there had been the hum of lights, the occasional beeping of registers. Yeah? Nothing. No sound. No movement. The shoppers were still there, but they weren't shopping. They were just standing in the aisles. Not looking at me. Not looking at anything. Just waiting. For me. I took a slow step forward, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. And then, over the loudspeakers in that same flat voice. Attention Velmart employees. Please report to work. Every hair on my body stood up. I wasn't a customer anymore. I was staff. I gripped the name tag in my pocket. The one they gave me. I didn't put it on. But as I walked forward, the shoppers began to move. They turned in perfect unison. And for the first time, they looked directly at me. Their faces were wrong. Too blank. Too smooth. Their eyes had no depth. They weren't people. They were placeholders. Like Velmart had built them to fill the aisles until someone real took their place. And now? That was supposed to be me. I kept walking. Toward the back of the store. The aisles stretched too long. The ceiling felt too high. Velmart wasn't a store. It was a system. A machine that kept replacing and replacing, cycling through employees, through customers, through people. And eventually, when the cycle was done, it erased them. I wasn't going to be erased. I reached the employees-only door at the back of the store. And I pushed through. The backroom wasn't normal. No shelves. No inventory. Just a massive empty space. Dark. Endless. Like stepping into a parking garage that never ended. The walls weren't walls. Just rows and rows of lockers. Each one had a name tag. I walked forward, my pulse thudding in my ears. And then I saw it. A locker with my name on it. My fingers shook as I reached for the handle. I didn't want to know what was inside. But I had to. I pulled it open. And inside, hanging neatly on a hook, was a Velmart uniform. And beneath it, folded carefully on the shelf, was my own shirt. The one I was wearing right now. I staggered back. No. No, no, no. This wasn't right. This wasn't me. I turned. And I wasn't alone anymore. Standing at the entrance of the back room, blocking the exit, was a man. And he looked exactly like me. Same face. Same clothes. Same expression I had a second ago. Like he had just stepped out of my reflection. He tilted his head, watching me. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached for the name tag on his chest. And peeled it off. The plastic fell to the floor. I stared at it. And printed in bold, black letters was, "Hello, my name is Darren Keller." My blood turned to ice. Darren wasn't gone. He had been swapped. And now? Velmart had someone new to take his place. Me. I ran. I didn't stop. I shoved past the lockers, through the door, past the watching shoppers. They didn't move. Didn't try to stop me. Because they didn't need to. Because next time I wouldn't leave. When I made it to my car, I floored it. I didn't stop driving until I saw city lights again. Until I saw other stores, real people. I didn't look back. Not once. Because I knew if I did, I'd see him standing there. Waiting. Epilogue, the final receipt. I don't know what Velmart is. I don't know how it appears, how it chooses who goes inside. But I do know this. I'm not the first person to escape. And I won't be the last. Because this morning I checked my wallet. And tucked inside where my old receipt had been was a new one. Today's date. No total. No purchases. Just one line, printed at the bottom. Thank you for your service. See you again soon.